The sun had already tipped westward when she stepped off the freight wagon, boots hitting dry earth with the weight of someone who no longer expected a welcome. Her dress was faded blue, the kind that once might have suited a Sunday, now bleached in by sun and scrubbed by creek water. She wore like a woman who knew it had to last her through the seasons. In her arms, wrapped tight in a scrap of flannel, she carried a cast-iron skillet and a small cloth sack tied with twine. That sack held flour, salt, and a bit of dried sage, what was left of the life she'd walked away from. The rest, she'd left behind without looking back. Clara didn't talk much. Hadn't in years. Words always seemed to cost more than they were worth. She had found that most folks didn't want truth anyhow. They wanted pleasantries, laughter, flirtation. She'd never been good at those things. She was good at food, at reading heat and dough and fire. She was good at silence and work, and not asking questions that made a man uncomfortable. But those things weren't often valued by the kind of people who did the hiring. The driver didn't help her down, just spit his tobacco into the dust and muttered, "Ain't much out there for a girl like you." Then he cracked the reins and rolled on, the wagon rocking away into heat-shimmered distance. She adjusted her pack and started walking. Dustwater Ranch lay 5 miles from the station, out past where the fence lines broke into wide, trembling plains. The air shimmered off sagebrush and dead grass, the world nothing but sky and dirt and the far-off song of a mourning dove. She walked with her head down, boots crunching over stone and dry root, the sun curling into her skin like a warning. It wasn't the first ranch she'd gone to. 3 days prior, she'd knocked on a door out near Jonah's Bluff. A broad man had answered. Plaid shirt stretched over his stomach gone soft from too much whiskey. Smile too quick to turn sour. "You," he'd laughed. "You look like you can't lift a bucket. What are you good for, girl?" She'd answered plain. "I can cook." He'd looked her over like she was something to bargain for, then spat in the dust and said he wasn't hiring. She hadn't begged, just turned and walked, dust in her throat, hunger in her belly. That was the thing about rejection. It didn't surprise her anymore. It just sat quiet in her bones, like something long accustomed to the dark. Now she reached a worn sign nailed to a leaning post. Dustwater Ranch. Letters sun-faded, barely legible. Beyond it, the land open like a wound, dry fields sloping toward a low-slung house of weathered timber and crooked stone chimneys. A barn leaned into wind. A few scattered cows grazed in silence. The place looked tired, but not cruel. That mattered. There was a man on the porch. He sat in a rocking chair, hat tilted low, hands clasped like he'd been waiting for something that never came. His boots were dusty, shirt rolled to the elbows, and his face, what she could see of it, was cut with lines deep in age alone could etch. He didn't rise when she approached, just lifted his head slightly, gaze meeting hers like he already knew her story and didn't expect it to end well. She stopped 3 paces from the steps and rested her skillet gently on the porch rail. "I don't talk much, mister," she said, her voice hoarse from dust and disuse. "But I can cook." The wind stirred a strand of hair across her cheek. She didn't move it, just waited, steady as an old oak, hands folded in front of her, jaw tight with pride that hadn't yet been broken. The man didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, long and quiet, like someone weighing more than just her words. Behind him, the rocking chair creaked faintly. A dog lay sleeping beside it. One paw stretched over the other, like it had long ago made peace with the stillness of things. "What's your name?" he asked at last. "Clara. Been on the road?" "Long enough." He nodded once. "Plenty of men come looking for work. Few women. I'm not looking for charity. Don't hand it out." She felt her throat tighten, but held her stance. There was something in his voice, not unkindness, but a sort of caution, like a man who'd once trusted the wrong people, and now kept his heart in his back pocket. "I don't drink," she said. "Don't steal. Don't cause trouble. But I can make bread that stays soft 3 days, and stew that makes a hard man quiet." The man shifted in his chair, slow as dusk. The silence stretched between them until it felt like something solid, something living. "Can you cook beans?" he asked deadpan. "I can make beans taste like forgiveness." That made something in him twitch, maybe the corner of his mouth, maybe not. He stood then, slow and deliberate. A tall man, built like someone who used to be strong and still carried the echo of it in his shoulders. "You're hired," he said simply, then turned and opened the door behind him. She didn't move right away, just stood there, the words sinking in like rain into dry earth. Hired. Hired meant food. Meant a place to sleep that wasn't under the stars or under threat. Meant she could be useful, maybe even needed. When she stepped inside, it was cool and dim. The house smelled like with smoke and saddle soap. The kitchen sat near the back, cast iron stove cold and waiting. She ran her fingers over the countertop, traced the chipped enamel bowl left behind from breakfast. There was a quiet here that felt restful, not like silence on the road. This silence had room in it. The man followed behind, pausing in the doorway like he didn't quite know how to welcome someone anymore. "Name's Elias Carr," he said. "I keep to myself. You'll have your own room off the hall. Mornings start early. Pay's modest." She nodded. "You got a skillet," he added, nodding toward the one she carried in. "That's a good start." She gave the faintest ghost of a smile. "It's been with me longer than most folks have." He didn't answer, just tipped his head and turned toward the door. Later, after she'd unpacked her flower and sage and hung her shawl on a wooden peg, she stood on the back porch, looking out over the land. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the fields like forgiveness. Inside, the stove creaked as she lit the fire. Outside, Elias stood near the fence line, hands on his hips, watching the cattle. He didn't look back at the house, but she could tell, somehow, that he felt her there, like the air had shifted in a way he hadn't expected. And though neither of them would have said it, something quiet and steady had just begun. Not love, not yet, but a recognition. Two silences that understood each other. And for Clara, that was enough, for now. Morning came with a low breeze and the scent of dew on ironwood. Clara rose before the rooster and before the men stirred in their cots. The house was still, touched only by the breath of wind to the rafters and the faint crack of her knuckles as she stirred warmth back into her fingers. She moved through the kitchen like she'd always belonged there, hands instinctively reaching for iron pans and worn wooden spoons. The stove came alive beneath her, swallowing kindling and spitting out heat like it remembered the rhythm of her work. She didn't sing, didn't hum, just worked. By the time the ranch hands clomped in, faces still creased with sleep, the table was full. Cornmeal biscuits hot and honey-glazed, pan-fried potatoes crisp and lard, and thick black coffee brewed dark as the sky before dawn. She didn't speak when they mumbled their thanks, didn't flinch when one of them, a sandy-haired man with a crooked smile, tried to compliment her with a wink that held no weight. She simply kept the kettle full and the griddle warm. Elias came in last, quiet as fog on water. He nodded at her once, poured his coffee without comment, and sat at the end of the table. He didn't speak to the men much either. Clara noticed the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was understood, expected. These were men who worked in heat and cold, who spoke with their hands and backs more than their mouths. She began to memorize the patterns of the house. The way the floorboards near the washroom groaned, the soft whimper the dog made in its sleep, the way Elias always paused at the porch steps before heading out, like there was something he forgot to say, but never quite did. Every day, Clara cooked, cleaned, and moved like wind to the prairie, gentle, constant, unseen unless she knew where to look. By the second week, she carved out a rhythm that felt like a kind of music. She stitched a curtain from old feed sackcloth and hung it over the window above the sink. She scrubbed the wooden counters with vinegar and herbs until they smelled of lemon thyme and pine. She began to tuck sprigs of wild rosemary into the edge of the bread loaves, not for flavor but for memory. Her mother had done the same. Elias noticed, not with words, but with the way his eyes lingered longer when he passed through the kitchen, or how he started sitting at the table rather than taking his meals outside. One morning, he said her name softly, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. Just that, Clara, as he passed her a tin of flour. She met his gaze for half a breath, then returned to kneading dough. Nothing more needed saying. Clara never asked about the photograph in the parlor, the one of the young woman with sharp cheekbones and sad eyes, holding a toddler with wild curls. But she saw Elias glance at it sometimes, long and hollow, like grief was a canyon he hadn't yet crossed. She understood that kind of silence. Hers wore different clothes, but it walked the same path. One evening, after supper, she stepped outside to cool her hands. The dog, Birdie, limped up to her, tail thudding softly. She crouched down, pressing her fingers to the old dog's paw, frowning at the swelling. "What happened to you?" she murmured, running a hand gently over his fur. Birdie licked her palm and leaned into her touch. From the porch, Elias said, "He got kicked by a colt last spring. Ain't healed proper." Clara didn't look up. "He still tries, though." "He does." There was a pause. "Like someone else I know." She met his eyes, searching them for mockery. There was none, only tired kindness. That night, she wrapped Birdie's paw in a rag, soaked with cold creek water. When she turned to leave, Elias stood behind her with a blanket draped over his arm. "You'll catch cold," he said, handing it to her without meeting her gaze. She took it in both hands. Their fingers brushed. Neither spoke. Days passed like that, quiet, slow, threaded with things not said but deeply felt. She began baking in the afternoons, experimenting with what little the pantry offered. Her pies were humble but fragrant, spiced with cloves and memory. When she left one cooling on the windowsill, it was gone by nightfall, a tin spoon resting beside the empty dish the next morning. She smiled without showing it. The hands grew used to her presence. Jeb and Miles, the two brothers who managed the barn, started teasing her in a way that felt harmless, as if she were a cousin or an older sister. Jeb once said, over a plate of chili, "You cook like a woman who's lost something and don't want anyone else to." Clara didn't answer. She just poured more coffee into his tin mug and walked away. One afternoon, Elias came in early from the fields. His shirt was damp with sweat, his hat in his hand. Clara had just set a bowl of fresh sourdough to rise. He stood at the door like he'd forgotten why he came inside. "You sew?" he asked. "A little. I've got a coat needs mending." "Leave it on the hook," she said. "I'll see to it after supper." He nodded but didn't leave. His gaze shifted to bowl of dough. "What's it you're making?" "Bread," she said, "with wild honey. Caught the bees near the edge of the fence line." He didn't move closer, but something in him softened. "Smells like," he stopped, cleared his throat. "Smells good." "Smells like home," she finished for him, not unkindly. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It settled between them like a blanket, pulled over two shoulders. That night, Clara left an apple pie on Elias's porch step. No note, no ribbon, just a gesture. A thank you, a reply. From the window, she watched him find it. He bent over her, picked it up, held it in both hands like it might break if mishandled. His expression didn't change much, but he closed his eyes for a moment before carrying it inside. Clara returned to the kitchen and washed the last of the dishes in warm, soapy water. Her hands moved slowly, carefully, as if what she held might matter in some quiet way. She didn't know what she was building yet. Not exactly. But it was there, between the flour-dusted counters and the low creak of the floorboards, in the sound of Elias's boots on the porch, in the way Birdie had begun to sleep outside her door at night, his injured paw tucked beneath him like it didn't matter anymore. Soft things were growing in this place, not loudly, not with flourish, but roots were reaching, steady and slow, and for the first time in a long while, Clara began to wonder what it might feel like not to keep walking. The first frost came quiet as a breath held too long. Ice clung to the porch railings and curled itself around the window panes like ghost fingers. Mornings grew harder, the kind that bit the skin and turned coffee into steam before the first sip. Clara rose earlier still, wrapping her shawl tight, hands pink with cold as she stoked the stove's belly into flame. Her breath puffed in front of her as she waited for the iron to warm. The ranch fell into a hush with the coming of winter, a hush that matched her own. Snow came sudden, just before dusk one day, a heavy blanket tumbling down like the sky had forgotten how to hold itself up. Clara watched it from the kitchen, flour on her hands, dough rising slow in the bowl beside her. The fire crackled low behind her, casting long shadows across the plank floor. There was something tender in the stillness, as though the house itself were listening. That evening, Elias came in with snow on his shoulders. His hat dripped quietly in his hands. He stomped his boots once, twice, then paused. She glanced at him, and he looked at her like he had something to say, but didn't know where to start. "The coat's favoring his leg again," he said instead, voice low. "Might be the cold setting into the bone." She wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll bring him warm mash in the morning." He nodded, didn't leave. Clara poured him a mug of cider, still hot from the stove. He took it with a grateful grunt and sat down, slow and deliberate, at the kitchen table. For a long while they said nothing, just sat with the soft ticking of the clock and the rise and fall of the fire. Elias's hands wrapped around the mug like he needed its heat to keep something inside him from freezing. Finally, he set it down and looked at her. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "Wherever you came from." She didn't answer right away. Took her time finishing the pie crust, folding the dough over the edge just so. Her voice was quiet when it came. "I miss the idea of it," she said, "not the place." He studied her, that long, slow look he was known for. She kept her eyes on the pie. "I buried my son under a cottonwood tree," he said after a while, voice dry as it was beside the stove. "He was 4, got sick and didn't get better." Clara's hand stilled. "My wife," he continued, "lasted another year. Couldn't speak his name after that. Couldn't speak much at all. One morning I woke up and she was gone. Took the rifle and a jar of creek water and never came back." The words weren't told like a confession, just a truth laid bare, same as any other fact. Fence posts rot, calves die, winter comes whether you want it or not. Clara didn't rush to fill the silence. When she finally did, her words were soft as flannel. "My mama bled out trying to give my brother a chance at life. I was 8. My father stopped speaking after that. I learned early that grief doesn't have a voice. It just becomes part of the furniture." Elias didn't move, but something in the room shifted, like a door somewhere cracked open. "Why'd you come here?" he asked. She looked up, held his gaze. "I was tired of being used up by people who only saw what I could give. I needed a place that didn't ask me to talk, just let me be." He nodded, and in that nod was something more than agreement, understanding, a recognition deeper than shared words. That night, the wind howled. Snow thickened, battering the windows like fists trying to be let in. Clara lay in her cot with a blanket up to her chin, but sleep didn't come easy. Something gnawed at her, a sound half heard, a feeling unsettled. Then she heard it, a sharp yelp. "Birdie!" She flung off the blanket, barefoot before she thought better. The barn. The dog must have slipped out in the storm. She didn't stop to light a lamp. Just pulled on her shawl and ran, boots crunching into the drift, wind slicing her cheeks raw. Her breath tore out in shreds. Snow stung her eyes. The barn loomed ahead, half buried in white. Inside, she found him. Birdie curled near a support beam, one leg caught between 2 slats of broken wood. His whimpers were soft, weakening. "Shoo!" she whispered, crouching beside him. Her fingers bled against the sharp edge of the beam as she pried it loose, lifting his paw free. She gathered him into her arms and turned, just as the barn door slammed open and a gust of cold followed the figure of Elias in. "Clara." His voice cracked against the wind. "I've got him," she said, teeth chattering. "Your feet," he said, eyes dropping. She looked down, bare and white with cold. She hadn't noticed. Elias moved quickly then, shedding his coat and wrapping around her, lifting Birdie from her arms. "Let's get you inside." Back in the house, he built the fire high and bundled her in blankets. Her toes were red, bleeding at the edges. He knelt before her with a basin of warm water, hands careful as he dabbed them clean. "You could have frozen out there," he said, voice a mix of anger and awe. "So could he," she answered. He shook his head. "You don't have to carry everything on your own." She met his eyes. "Neither do you." The words settled deep. That night, she stayed near the fire, wrapped in wool and silence. Birdie slept at her side, paw bandaged and warm. Elias sat nearby, carving a small block of wood with a knife. Not looking at her, but not far either, For a long time, nothing was said. Then he rose, walked into the next room, and returned with something folded in his hands. He laid it on the edge of her chair. A cloth apron, new, stitched with care. Clara ran her fingers over the seams. The thread wasn't straight. It wobbled and looped like it had been done by hands more used to reins and needles. But it was careful. It was meant. She looked up. Elias stood at the hearth, face in shadow, eyes on the flames. "Thank you," she said. He didn't reply, just gave her that quiet nod again, the one that said everything without saying anything at all. She tied the apron around her waist, even though there was no baking to be done. It rested soft against her skirt, like a promise not yet spoken. Outside, the wind began to die down, the storm passing. Inside, something else had settled in its place. Not love, not yet, but a warmth that hadn't been there before, a fire that would hold through the cold. Spring crept in like a secret too shy to declare itself. Snow turned to mud, and the land, once brittle and bare, began to soften under the warming sky. Shoots of green slipped between fence posts and under the bones of winter's leftover chill. Clara rose each day as she always had, apron tied, fire lit, hands moving through dough and spice in the rhythm of a life she no longer felt outside of. There was a comfort now in the creaks of floorboards, the scent of pine smoke and bread. She had become part of the house, not as furniture, but as a hearth itself, something the others gathered near without thinking. Elias had not spoken again of the past, but he no longer kept it hidden behind silence. He'd begun to help her in the kitchen, not often, not clumsily, but with intention. She'd hand him a knife, and he'd slice without asking where or how. Once, she found him standing in the garden, holding a sprig of mint she planted near the window. "This smells like her," he'd murmured, and for a moment Clara hadn't known which woman he meant, his wife or her. The ranch hands, once skeptical, now trusted her. Jeb had started calling her Miss Clara in the mornings, not mockingly, but with quiet respect. Miles asked for a poultice when his shoulder acted up. Bertie followed her from the barn to the porch and back again, limping less as the days grew warmer. The rhythm had deepened. Clara no longer braced for the next departure. Then came the man from Jonah's Bluff. He arrived late in the day, just as the light turned to amber and the wind died down to a hush. Clara was at the stove, searing onions in a skillet, the scent rising like memory. She didn't hear the rider until Bertie barked and Elias stepped out onto porch. The voice was familiar, too familiar. "Well, I'll be," it drawled. "Didn't think you'd end up here, little bird." Clara turned, slow and careful. Her hand stayed on the skillet, though the heat beneath her skin had nothing to do with the flame. Roy Danner sat high on his saddle, smirking, dust on his boots, whiskey on his breath. Same hat, same narrow eyes. The man who'd laughed her off, spat at her worth, and left her walking through wind and wilderness. Elias didn't move from the steps. "State your business," he said flatly. Roy leaned forward. "Came to see an old friend. Looks like you've been keeping something sweet and quiet out here, Elias. Didn't figure you for a man who'd go in for leftovers." Jeb and Miles stepped out from the bunkhouse then, hands at their belts. The stillness cracked. Clara stepped to the doorway, apron stained with flour and sage. "She's not yours," Elias said, low but steady. Roy's eyes narrowed. "She was looking for work when I saw her last. Now she's wearing aprons and getting sweet on the boss. How convenient." Clara didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. "You told me I wasn't worth a damn. Say I didn't look like I could lift a bucket." Roy sneered. "Didn't figure you'd go looking for pity. Guess you found it." Elias took one step forward, slow and firm. "Leave." "Or what?" Roy laughed. "You gonna sick the cook on me?" Clara didn't speak again. She stepped back inside and stirred the onions before they burned. Outside, hoofs kicked up dust as Roy turned his horse. But before he left, he spat into the dirt and muttered, "She'll come begging back, sooner or later." The night settled hard. The air carried a tension that wouldn't leave. The meal was quiet, though not because of silence, because of something deeper. Watchful, waiting. Elias said little, his brow dark, his hands clenched too long around his fork. Clara moved as she always had, but her shoulders were taut, and her gaze lingered on the windows more than usual. They thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The fire came 3 nights later. Clara awoke to the crackle of flames and Bertie's frantic barking. At first she thought it a dream. Heat licking at the windows, light too orange to be dawn. Then the smell hit her, thick and fast, and she ran. The barn was ablaze. Flames climbed the hayloft like hungry vines, sparks leaping into the sky. Men were already shouting, stumbling into boots, grabbing buckets. Elias was at the edge of the fire line, shouting orders. Miles wrestled with a frightened horse. Jeb threw water against a wall that had already turned to charcoal. Then came the cry. A calf, trapped in the rear stall. Clara didn't think. She ran. The smoke was a wall. The heat slapped her skin raw. She pushed through it, arm over her mouth. Breath held. The calf was there, wide-eyed, legs tangled in rope. She dropped to her knees, slicing the cord with a rusted hook, pulling with all her strength. The roof groaned above her. Embers fell like hail. She got the calf out just as a beam gave way behind them. Someone caught her as she stumbled clear. Elias, his coat thrown over her, his arms hauling her back. "Are you burned?" he shouted over the roar. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Her skirts were smoldering, ash clinging to her sleeves, but the calf was safe, bleeding as Jeb led it to water. Her breath came in shallow gasps. "Kitchen," she rasped. Stove still lit. Elias turned at once, shouting for water at the house. By dawn, the barn was a husk of smoking timber. The house had been spared. Clara sat wrapped in blankets on the porch, her feet blistered, arms raw. Bertie lay beside her, silent but watchful. Elias stood beside her, his own clothes scorched, hands blackened with ash. For a long while, he said nothing, just stood with her in the gray morning, watching the sun rise over blackened wood. Then, without warning, he crouched beside her and took her hands gently into his. "You don't have to talk much," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "I hear you just fine." Clara looked at him, eyes rimmed with soot and wet with exhaustion. "I never asked," he said, softer now. "But I'd like to keep you, not just as cook." She didn't speak, didn't nod. She leaned into him, forehead to his shoulder, and that was answer enough. The world was still burning somewhere. Life would throw its fire again, but not everything turned to ash. Not everything could be broken. Some things, some people, endured because they were built not from noise or promise or show, but from quiet things. A pie cooling on a sill, a coat laid across cold shoulders, a calf saved in smoke. What the fire couldn't burn, it left stronger. And so they sat in the silence between storms, not saying love, just living it. If this tale stirred something in you, go on and hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another story from Frontier, where hearts heal slow and love runs deep as canyon rivers. Every click helps keep the campfire burning.